when it comes to African history, it is essential we get our facts right. The name Nigeria was literally thought up by a British Times journalist. Until the late 1800s, what is today known as Nigeria was a range of diverse ancient nations, kingdoms, and empires, which in a stroke of vicious colonial calculation came to be known dismissively as tribes. Some of these kingdoms, empires, and nations had populations much bigger than Britain itself. These populations became Nigeria through a potent cocktail of racism, rampant capitalism, and militarism. The creation of what we now call Nigeria came in multiple phases. By 1870, palm oil replaced the slave trade as the main business in the natural resource-rich Niger Delta. Britain took territories around the lower and middle river Niger into the British Empire through the creation of a corporation called the Royal Niger Company. Then the Royal Niger Company sold its territories in Nigeria to the British government for £865,000, the equivalent of 45 million in today's money. And then in 1912, when Winston Churchill switched the British Navy's fleet from being coal to oil-powered, came the pursuit of oil. So an increasingly insatiable need for oil led the British colonial government to grant exclusive oil exploration license over Nigeria to the Shell Darcy Exploration Company. This was the making of Shell and the beginning of the destruction of the Niger Delta and its people. The lives of the people of the region was of no consequence whatsoever to British leaders. The type of care and concern that is given to oil extraction in places such as Norway, safely laying pipes under the ground, employing locals, enhanced environmental protection, is still entirely absent in the Niger Delta today. In the Ogoni land region of the Niger Delta alone, over 2 million barrels of oil were spilled between 1976 and 1992. For Shell, the licenses issued exclusively by the British in 1938 became a license to print money, ruin economies, and pollute the earth. While Shell rakes in the cash, what the people got in return was a life expectancy of just 40 years. And they also got the blame. In the exact same way rogue police officers use racist tropes to frame innocent black people, Shell regularly blames the people of the Niger Delta for the misery and criminality inflicted upon them. The people of the Niger Delta are fighting back, but their resistance has come at a huge cost. In 1995, 9 members of the Movement for the Survival of the Ogoni People, MOSOP, were hanged by the then Nigerian dictatorship. The British Empire and Shell have ruined lives in Nigeria. Amidst a fossil fuel-driven cost of living crisis, nothing new for Nigerians, Shell's profit tripled in the last year alone.
We will never forget what you have done.
We don't only demand an end to the climate crisis, we stand side by side with the people of Nigeria demanding justice now.
Now, for a discussion around this, we're being joined by Dr. Shogbamimu. Dr. Shola, it's good to have you here with us again today.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Yes, good morning. Now, in this film, you attribute the making of Nigeria to, and I quote, a potent cocktail of racism, rampant capitalism, and militarism. Could you talk us through this submission and the residual effects of this on today's Nigeria, even beyond the Niger Delta?
Well, let's bear in mind that the Nigeria we know today is not a single nation. It's a nation of nations, a nation that once consisted of empires prior to the intervention of the British. And what they did was to amalgamate all of these different nations without any thought, and mapped out people that were neighbors or worked together in different ways. It just brought them together, made them a single nation without consent. And they could not achieve this without indirect rule, for instance, in the North. They could not achieve this without violence, pillage, without the horrors of colonialism. And so what we have today in Nigeria especially when we think about the benefits that the British Empire got from colonizing vast empires, vast natural resources, is that the British Empire, they basically took resources and wealth from all of these nations that they then created as the Niger area, which became Nigeria, took all that wealth into Britain and really ransacked Nigerians. They pillaged Nigerians. There was violence, untold violence. People fought and lost their lives and liberty for independence, for freedom that you cannot begin to imagine. That is where we are today. And when it comes to the issue of oil and our natural resources, this became a strategic interest for Britain. So even when Nigeria, was no longer colonized by Britain, what did happen was we had a residual of the colonial influence, and that included companies like Shell that had power and they had influence and control over our natural resources. Now, as much as we should be talking and highlighting the historical reference, the links and the fundamental link between environmental justice today and the historical influence of Britain and its present day influence, I also acknowledge that governments of Nigerian governments, past and present, have not addressed this issue. And this is problematic.
All right, Dr. Shola, talk to me, because doing the research and actually watching your documentary, it baffles me how one private corporation can wield so much power over a region. Talk to us about this culpability here. You mentioned the difference between Nigeria and Norway.
Yes.
What did we do to ensure that we meted ourselves this very, very grave fate?
Right. I think the first thing is we should not be baffled, okay? If we did not know our history, then it's time to know what the history is. If we do not understand how history plays a part today and that the present day influence and effect, especially economically, on people in the Niger Delta area, if we do not know that, it's time to get educated right now. And it's not enough to just think about what we must do next. We must redefine, take away the definition that has been given us and put in the truth. And the truth of the matter is, the reason why companies like Shell have so much power and had power before is the power that the colonials gave them and the power that Britain still has today, okay? And if you bear in mind, when I said earlier in the documentary that the company that the British elites, and that included the royal family, created, right? They then sold those companies to the British government. So you can already see that people with power in Britain sold to the government regions in Nigeria, acquired through violence, acquired through horrendous means, sold that to the British government, which they made money from. Then the British government did what? They created the Shell company. They gave it licenses. All of that feeds in today. Why is it that our governments have done nothing about it? What influence does Shell still have today? Why is it that lives such as those of Mossab, why is it that lives were lost? Because people are fighting for a better living condition for those in the Niger Delta. Why are Nigerians not doing more about it? That's what I want to know. I'm done with feeling baffled. There's no need to feel baffled. We should all be demanding this justice. We should all be demanding reparations from Shell, most definitely, and accountability from the Nigerian government.
Environmental degradation and poor infrastructure for oil extraction are areas that this documentary also touches on. A very good example would be Bayelsa State in the core of the Niger Delta, where the impact of deforestation and coastal erosion is fast becoming a more threatening reality on livelihoods, and the locals there have been agitating for many years. Question is, beyond the influence of British imperialists, what specific roles would you say the Nigerian government plays in the status quo and the future of this region, if there is any, in your opinion?
I mean, Nigerian government plays a pivotal role. It is the government of Nigeria. And as far as I'm concerned, as long as that region still sits within Nigeria, it is the government's duty to do better by the people. The government cannot be benefiting, and the government benefits financially and economically from the resource that it obtains through its arrangement with Shell. And nobody else. I do not feel that the working people of Nigeria benefit from it, and definitely not the people in the lands, the Ogoni lands and all the Niger Delta area, including the Biafra lands that you mentioned. They are not benefiting from it. And the reason for this is because their lives are considered less worthy. So the example we gave in the documentary about Norway, there is no way that Norway could have gotten away with what the Nigerian government is getting away with, because Norwegians would not have allowed it. But bear in mind that Nigerians are not allowing, but I do not believe that we've put our collective force behind demanding better conditions for people in the Niger Delta and accountability. And I don't think it's right to say that this situation has outlived British imperialism. No, it has not. Because understand this, the reason why Shell is still as powerful as it has is because Britain still has strategic interests in Nigeria and its natural resources. So whether you are, and this is not conspiracy theory, this is fact, that every single time that powerful economies in the global north, like Britain, have a strategic interest, what do? They bring all of their efforts behind the scenes to ensure the status quo. And this again feeds into Biafra. When the Biafra war happened and the people of the Igbos were fighting the Nigerian government in order to have their own land, what did we get? But for the British government to send power, military power, support, money to the Nigerian government, and that absolutely decimated the Biafran people. So it is not enough to say that this has outlived British imperialism. No, it hasn't. Whereas we might not be talking about imperialism today. Imperialism has taken a new form. It's taken a new name, same as the Commonwealth. I say that the Commonwealth is nothing but the British Empire renamed. And that is what we're dealing with today. They're all interlinked.
All right, talking about being interlinked, one thing that stands out, or the common denominator in all that has transpired and is still transpiring, is that strong word corruption. Now, if we're to roll back just a few years ago, back in 2016, where there was a flag up of the Ogoni cleanup, and as we speak, there are talks that $1 billion has been disbursed, but nothing major is happening. What are the forces, in your opinion, do you think are stopping these things from happening? Or is it just lack of appetite from the government to do something about all that has happened over the years?
There is definitely a case for lack of political will in the government. But I say that there's a collective responsibility here. Corruption goes in only so far as we, the people, allow it to go. There are millions more Nigerians than there are people in government. The Nigerian government we've allowed the Nigerian government to become a cesspit of corruption. Not just this year, not just back in 2016, but since its initiation, since Nigeria became independent. This is the problem. We keep putting people in government that are not worthy of the office. And then when they're in the office, we don't hold them accountable. So there is that collective responsibility at that end. But also, the fact that corruption thrives so much is because either at an international level and a national level, corruption is part and parcel of how the governance of countries like Nigeria are allowed to run. I mean, the same global north countries that would turn a blind eye, presumably turn a blind eye in order to have their strategic interests fulfilled, will be the same ones naming Nigeria as one of the corrupt countries in the world. Why do Nigerians allow this to happen? Why aren't we calling it out, fighting it, and placing in power the right kind of leaders? The leaders who are ready to do the hard work, the leaders who are ready to hold accountable those who have literally stolen from Nigerians. There are millions of Nigerians who ought to have a better living condition from the vast wealth of Nigeria. We don't have that. So as far as I'm concerned, when we talk about culpability, when we talk about accountability, when we talk about corruption, we have to look at it at every single state, the macro level and the micro level, and how collectively all these things speak into our democracy. I know for a number of years we had military dictatorship, but that's not where we are anymore. I get that Nigeria is still, I suppose, democratically young. But again, if you are hungry, if you are homeless, if you are desperate for change, that should be enough for you to vote for the right kind of people. Heck, that should be enough for you to put yourself in that right position so you can change things, to use your influence, whether it's in your schools, in your workplace, on the street, to be discussing, engaging in discourse, and actively participating in civil change. Because the money they're making at that corrupt level, it also feeds into how corruption plays out at the national level, at the local level, because everybody needs to survive. But enough with the mentality of me, myself, and I. Me, myself, my village, me, myself, my town, me, myself, my family. Enough. Because you see, if you don't understand that when inequality hits your neighbor, it's going to come for you, then this is exactly where we're going to be, from time immemorial. Companies like Shell must be held to account. And I do not understand why past and present governments of Nigeria have not done that to date.
All right, Dr. Shola, let's look at the term responsibility, as it forms one of the pips of this entire discourse. This film also alludes quite blatantly to a perspective of Shell's role in framing and blaming locals, for instance, in the Ogoni land, as referenced in the documentary. While, in fact, there is an exploitation of their resources and threats to their life expectancy. Now, approaching this particular issue with a different pair of lens, some would say that the reality is that crude theft and vandalism is actually quite rife in Nigeria and has, in fact, become a national emergency in these parts. Talking about responsibility, what responsibilities can locals take for this narrative? Is there any attached to them?
Absolutely, there is responsibility at the local level. This is what I meant by collective responsibility at every single level. But I don't think it is right to look at some of these so-called, some of this vandalism, so to speak. I mean, some of them are absolutely not justified. But nothing comes out of nothing. A lot of what is defined and described as vandalism are people who are trying to get all of our attention to say we need help. And when we are not acting collectively to change the status quo, all we're doing is feeding those who are disenfranchised, those who are disgruntled, those who are frustrated. We are giving them room to do the things that we know, actually, this is going to make things worse. So at a local level, you look at the people at the local level who are trying to survive. Yes, and a number of them, I'm sure, are trying to engage. They're trying to, they will come out and say, look, this is wrong. But at the same time, look at the authorities that they have to rely on. Whether it's the institution that is the police, the institution that is the local government, the institution that is the federal government, where exactly are they getting help from? So there's only so much the locals can do if those at the federal level, those with institutional power, are not actually stepping up to change the status quo. We need to change the status quo.
All right, Dr. Shola, briefly before I wrap it up, because some say that, some speak of some conspiracy theory that there is a higher force in play here that have tried to stifle people that have come out. You mentioned Massaw back in the day, and they say that not until this higher forces or this powers that be probably pull their hands, that things might never change. In the bid of going down this path, have you faced any kind of resistance of some sort, or are these just mere conspiracy theories?
I do not believe these are theories at all. I don't believe that it's a conspiracy theory when, quite frankly, apply some deductive reasoning is what I'll say to people. There are no shadows behind. There are real institutions behind the fact that the people of the Niger Delta, their lands have been decimated, that their lives have been totally turned upside down for decades. And the reason for this is because those in power, institutions and individuals, know they can get away with it. It's the reason why you would not find this in countries like Norway. This is the point. There is no conspiracy theory here. There are real people who are behind what is going on. These things are not happening of their own volition. That is not how it works. So as far as I'm concerned, when we talk about collective responsibility, I'm challenging people, please do better with your democratic elections and your vote, your right to vote. I'm challenging the institutions that are our government. You have a responsibility to make the living conditions of people in the Niger Delta and Nigerians much better. We can't have the kind of resource that we have and still be referred to as a third world country. All you are seeing right now is more of that application of the link between systemic racism and environmental justice. This is all still part of it, that companies like Shell, Unilever can all still benefit in such ways and not be held accountable. This is real, people. There's no conspiracy here. This is real. And Shell could not have tripled its profits, tripled, in a time of pandemic, in a time of global cost of living crisis, global energy crisis, and Nigerians are still suffering. That makes no sense.
All right. We want to thank you, Dr. Shogbamimu, for joining us this morning, and of course for sharing this beautiful work with us.